Universe Online. The next legend is you.
You three dead. The lucky ones died fighting.
This game is dead. At least that's what tons of people online love to say about online multiplayer games these days. Channels like Clean Prince Gaming and Downward Thrust have both made very successful channels off saying such and such game is dead. DC Universe Online didn't just die, it was murdered. Oh, this game is dead. Oh, F this game, it's so dead. Let it die. Everyone shut up. Shut the hell up. Let me explain to you why this game isn't dead. Oh, for sure, the population isn't amazing. It's not going to have millions of players online at a time. Not many games do, except for big games like World of Warcraft these days. But it has enough of a population to argue that the game isn't dead. That doesn't go to say that the game hasn't gone through its ups and downs. In fact, DC Universe Online has gone through much more than others. The game had an incredibly rocky beginning, and the fact that it's still alive and kicking is hard to believe. There's tons of stories that people aren't aware of for this game, and honestly, it seems almost unfair when you look back at it. Grab some popcorn, pop open a soda or beer or whatever you prefer, and listen to the checkered past that is DC Universe Online, and then at the end, I'll ask the question: is DC Universe Online dead or alive? DC Universe Online was first unveiled as far back as July 4th, 2008. Sony Online Entertainment, which is now commonly known as Daybreak Games, is cited to have developed this massively multiplayer online game with Incredible Hulk Ultimate Destruction's gameplay in mind. Look at that. Think about that ambition. In 2008, DC Universe Online's competition for an action-based MMORPG was little to none. The closest competitor in the superhero genre was City of Heroes, released in 2004. And while that game was popular in its own right, the only other competitor I can think of, thanks to YouTuber Nerdslayer for making this title known, would be Chronicles of Spellborn. Check out his video for more information on a game that is actually dead. Fast forward 2 years in which a new trailer was shown as well as gameplay with Jens Andersen. The clip I am showing here is an early build of DC Universe Online, as the released build would be much different than this alpha version that is shown. Not much is known or at least cataloged online during this cycle of DC Universe Online's development. However, at least analyzing the gameplay shown and the trailer that was unveiled during 2010, one could concur that the game looked promising. It had a true action combat system, took place in a familiar world with DC Comics, and seemed to show tons of customization. It looked like a comic book lover's dream. The gameplay looked truly unique and different, especially for its time back in 2010. Also, remember this game wasn't only going to launch on the PC, but the PlayStation 3 as well, a console, which during 2010, its only other major competitors that I know of would have been Final Fantasy XI on the PlayStation 2, EverQuest Adventures on the PlayStation 2, as well as Final Fantasy XI on the Xbox 360. To build even more hype that year, additional interviews were shown with lead names behind the project. Chris Kao of EverQuest fame, Jim Lee, the comic book artist, Wes Yanagi, the senior producer at the time, known for a variety of games, Mark Anderson, who was lead art director, John Blakeham, who was the executive producer, and then finally Jens Andersen, who was known for Star Wars Galaxies at the time. Along with many of the interviews going on, it was also announced that the game would feature an all-star voice cast, including Mark Hamill and Kevin Conroy voicing Batman and Joker. Just to name a few of them, comic book fans and MMORPG players were excited. Developers invited early registration in July of 2010 for a beta that was finally available on December 14th, 2010 that ran to January 5th, 2011. The beta ended with what many beta players recall as being one of the best events that DCUO has ever hosted. Lead producers like Jim Lee played respective iconics in the game, like Joker, as the player base fought against Brainiac, which eventually ended with Brainiac defeating the player base and the servers shutting down, with the story intentions being that Brainiac had won and took over Earth. However, this is where a lot of the problems from the game started to pop up. As it was announced, the game would be released right after the beta on January 11, 2011, literally a week after its initial beta. The beta had a lukewarm response with players, indicating a bevy of bugs and problems that unfortunately were never addressed, but even so, the game released on the date with commercial success becoming Sony Online Entertainment's fastest selling game ever. Speaking of sales, let's back up a little bit. For players that currently play DC Universe Online, what do you think the budget of DCUO was? According to an article written during its launch on HeroComplex.com, the budget would be an estimated $50 million, which is not including things like advertisements and sales. DC's development lasted 5.5 years, with over 150 staff members working on the project. Coming out of the gate, DCUO was an incredibly expensive game, so Sony had a lot riding on it. Did it pay off? Well, looking as far back in the early months of DC Universe Online, the player base seemed prosperous. It already had an uphill climb since during its launch window, many games were going free to play, while DC Universe Online was steadfast on being a pay-to-play game like World of Warcraft. Even so, the game had a healthy community during its first couple of months, obviously. Many left after its initial launch, but every online game will launch and then have people leave. However, the first major and almost killing blow was unfairly dealt as early as 3 months into DC Universe Online's life. On April 20th, the infamous 2011 Sony PlayStation Network hack occurred, forcing DC Universe Online to shut down its game for a deadly 23 days. 23 days is a massive amount of time to be offline, especially during its infancy. This was an incredibly unfair occurrence to DC Universe Online, as the game couldn't even get its damn foot in the door before it was taken offline for nearly a month. As if that wasn't enough, before the game even got back online, it was confirmed that Chris Kao, the lead director of the game, was stepping down and appointing Mark Anderson of God of War as the new lead director. The game already was having change-ups in lead development, which is never good in any development team. Literally 4 months into DCUO's life, and it was facing a dwindling player base, hemorrhaging money, and they couldn't even get the damn game back online to launch new content which the development team was constantly updating the player base on, trying their hardest to get players excited for the future of the game. Once servers came back online, DC offered players a month of free gameplay, free in-game items, and announced as much future content as they could to recover what was lost. But the damage was already done. The game was moving on the age of only 6 months, and barely anyone was playing. On top of all of this, WB was also going through a court case that impeded the DC development team, narrowing what they could actually implement in the game. This court case lasted 2 long years into DC's lifespan. So let's recap here. DC loses nearly all of its player base during the Sony hack, massive layoffs and director changes occur behind the scenes on the development team, and there's a lawsuit going on with WB DC Comics which prevented the development team from creating many things that players wanted within the game. Oh boy. Do you believe me now when I say this game should not have survived? So what was the next logical step for DC at this point? In a last-ditch effort to get players playing the game, they changed a number of things. First, the sharded servers were merged into one big mega server, allowing all players who played the game to play together. Of course, people were still separated by either PC or PlayStation. Then, implementation like cross-faction, PvP, and PvE were developed as well. And then finally, on November 2nd, 2011, not even a year into development, DCUO went free to play. This should have spelled the end for the game, but oddly enough, it was a second wind, and it was something that DC needed. Servers were packed with players, wanting to try the game. The development team scrambled to get everything under control, as millions of players were knocking on the door. It seemed like finally, DC had a chance to prove itself. Things weren't shaken up again until February 2015, when Sony Online Entertainment became Daybreak Games. This was a good and bad thing. Since SOE was no longer a Sony company, this opened up the game to become multi-platform, including consoles such as Xbox. However, if you've been keeping up with recent news of Daybreak, there was some controversies behind the company, including Russian ties, that could have shut down the company. But for now, this news has been swept under the rug, and was indicated by the CEOs that this was not the case. Hopefully, this stays true. So since DC's launch, the game is still going strong. It has since launched on PlayStation 4, shutting the PlayStation 3 servers recently as the console was growing old, so it made sense to make that decision. It has also launched on the Xbox One as well, increasing its platform base, which is always a good thing. Also, since Sony recently announced that they are willing to allow crossplay finally, the developers have shown interest in getting DCUO fully cross-compatible with all its platforms. The game is pushing a long-standing 9 years come January, and for how much crap it's gone through, it still gets content updates quite frequently. Compared to other online games that get major content expansions once every 6 months or so, DC opts to add new content every 3 to 4 months. Unfortunately, DC's development team never truly recovered from its constant changes and layoffs, as the team has always been very small, and to compensate for its small size, DC's developers have always had to reuse content or cut corners to meet their 3 to 4 month release schedule, even trying a monthly update schedule at one point, which was quickly retired. Honestly, through all this game's hardships, and putting my personal bias aside, if I were to compare this game to other MMOs out there, I would say it's at least still worth a try. The player base is still active, and despite all the haters it has online, it's still actively being developed for, which is more than I can say for games that had a lot more flair going for it, like WildStar or the original Secret World. Moving past the history of DC Universe Online, let's talk about the constant updates that DC implements, as well as the player base and developers. Currently, there is 32 major content updates for DC, with a 33rd content update coming in November. The span of updates the game has is pretty vast, and compared to other games on the market, has a lot to offer in its age, with plenty of content ranging from 8 players all the way down to 1. Unfortunately, in the current state of DC, the PvP has taken a back seat since the developers have commented that they don't really know how to approach fixing the issues within it, and the player base tends to lash out whenever something is changed about it. The life of an MMORPG needs a PvP community, and for the developers to outright ignore any sort of PvP updates is not good. However, looking at other MMORPGs on the market right now, it seems that DC isn't the only one with this problem for some reason. Even big games like World of Warcraft seem to misstep when implementing any kind of newer PvP content. So hopefully DC bounces back with something, since it did have a rather healthy PvP community during its inception, and since they aren't updating it, they are missing out on some of its market base. I'm not going to go in depth about each game update or content pack since there is so many of them to talk about that could be a video in itself. However, when talking about game updates and content implementation, the developer to community interaction could be better. Many players feel that their voices are not being heard, with their criticisms being outright removed in the forums. While many updates lately have been centered around giving things to the player base that have been asked for, like style unlocking, easier inventory management, and a variety of quality of life updates, many still feel that they are being silenced. Fortunately, this does seem to be something that developers have recently acknowledged, since they do seem to be more active on the forums, talking to players more so, at least within the past year. Going back to Jens Andersen leaving the company within the past 2 years, there were 2 major names that started appearing in DC's development streams. Nerd of Prey, also known as SJ, who essentially replaced Jens Andersen as our creative lead, and Jackster, also known as Jack Emmert, who became CEO of Daybreak, leading DC Universe Online. Based on their LinkedIn profiles, both SJ and Jack have worked in the game industry for quite a bit, with SJ being a game designer for SOE, and Jack being the CEO of Cryptic Studios, which is the studio that founded City of Heroes. Ironic that the CEO of that game came back to work on another superhero-based MMORPG. Ever since their roles being taken, DC has entered an era of vast customization options, marketplace and cash shop updates, as well as more emphasis on microtransactions. The biggest controversial implementation was their inclusion of time capsules, aka loot boxes, which unfortunately drove many players away or drove them to open their wallets, since many of the better customization options have been locked behind these loot boxes. Personally, this is a crappy time in the video game industry, since almost every game is doing this, currently from Overwatch to Elder Scrolls Online, so it did not necessarily surprise me when a system like this was included. However, it didn't make it any less hurtful. Hopefully, with the advent of government stepping in and proclaiming loot boxes as gambling, DC will change this system for the better. Finally, let's take a look at actual population. Unfortunately, I can't look at any actual numbers besides Steam charts. Looking at Steam, it seems to average around 300 to 600 players, which might seem a bit low, but let's compare it to some other titles. Games like Terra and MapleStory have similar numbers and both are free to play. Now admittedly, games like Warframe and Final Fantasy XIV get much higher numbers, but I'll pose the question. Why do they? Warframe is a free-to-play game that is highly regarded as one of the best, but has many YouTubers trying to talk about it with its content drought. Final Fantasy XIV is a pay-to-play game, but people are willing to subscribe to it and obviously play it. The problem is twofold against DC Universe Online: advertisement and theme. There's an article I pulled up on MMOgames.com that talks about this problem, interestingly. Why aren't superhero-based online games successful or particularly popular? Let's take a moment to talk about all the other superhero online games that exist or existed. First, there was City of Heroes, which even during its sunset was widely played and successful, but nonetheless closed its doors. Next is Champions Online, which while it had some moderate success during its launch, the game development behind the game itself has always been very shaky and confusing. It's a wonder it's still online. Then there was Marvel Heroes, which frankly was a Diablo clone, also met its demise in the past year with its closure of Gazillion Entertainment. And frankly, that's all the online superhero MMORPGs. Is anyone seeing a pattern here? Superhero or comic book based MMORPGs just don't sell too well, or at least don't sell well compared to fantasy-based or even sci-fi-based online games. Even in the console market, how often do you see superhero or comic book-based games? Besides Spider-Man on PS4, I can't think of many that were popular besides maybe Marvel Ultimate Alliance. Next is advertisement. When was the last time you saw a commercial for DC Universe Online? An ad on Facebook? An ad on your favorite video game website? Almost never, right? For some strange reason, even when SOE was the head of the game, Daybreak never tends to advertise their games. Whether it's a lack of funds or outright lack of interest, DC Universe Online always tends to be forgotten, which could also explain a lack of potential numbers. So not only is the game not advertised as much, it just gets ignored because it's the theme of the comic book world. Most PC or MMORPG advocates would most likely be inclined to play fantasy-based games or even sci-fi-based games compared to its superhero counterpart. So with all the information I've shared in this video, the answer should be clear, right? DCUO is dead for certain. I'd be inclined to agree with you, especially since I said in the beginning of this video, if you are a YouTuber right now, it's actually beneficial to your subscriber count, views, and exposure if you say a game is dead. It doesn't even have to be DC Universe Online. Look at the number of DCUO is dead videos here. Not to mention how many views they tend to get. Dakman here has a video where he literally just talks about the game for roughly 13 minutes, and it has 56,000 views. Most likely because it has the trigger word, dead, in the title. It's an incredibly popular topic right now, and honestly, if you are looking to boost your channel a bit, one would recommend to follow the bandwagon. Heck, I'm even doing so in this video. Many people complain about lack of PvP support, developers ignoring them, bad graphics, even though the game is running on an outdated engine and upgrading the graphics on the game would be nearly impossible, but moving on, as well as other sensitive topics. But as a veteran player of many online role-playing games, I'd be inclined to argue that even though the game isn't the top of the popularity poll, and it's got its problems, it's not dead. It has players, it has game updates coming, and it takes place in a widely popular universe, even if it isn't fantasy. So my final question to you after all of this is such: do you feel DC Universe Online is dead? I encourage you to write a detailed response in the commentary section of this video, and I'll respond to you with my opinion. I hope with this video those of you who may not understand what went on behind the scenes of this game maybe have a better understanding and appreciation for how far this game has come. As always, if you like this video, give it a thumbs up or a thumbs down if you didn't. Subscribe to my channel to support content like this and to be notified when I stream or post a new video, as well as follow me on all my other social medias like Twitter and Twitch, and I'll post all of those sites down below in the description. Until next time, guys, have a good one and keep playing.